Thanks to everyone for coming to the Poverty Solutions first event in a new engagement series. Poverty Solutions is a new university-wide initiative of the University of Michigan that seeks to partner with community-based organizations and policymakers to test out new strategies for preventing and alleviating poverty. So we were just launched last October. In January, we announced $200,000 in grants, mainly for community, for academic researchers to partner with community-based organizations to really try to delve into concrete ways to tackle poverty. That program done in partnership with the Detroit Urban Research Center, a research institute here on campus that has membership across many community-based stakeholders in Detroit, has been an incredible partner with us. In this event, Making Housing Affordable, we're going to hear first from our keynote, Arthur Jemison, and then a set of breakout sessions that are really meant to be interactive. I want to thank Dean Bedeca and the School of Social Work for hosting this very first event. You all are sort of our guinea pigs for this engagement series, so we're going to see how all this goes today, but we're super excited about the interest and the turnout. I want to thank the Ginsberg Center that's been a really great partner in reaching out to students, and our friend Rick Robb in the back, wave Rick, from Benzie County in sort of the northern part of the Lower Peninsula, I think wins the prize for having come the farthest for the event. So thanks for coming all this way. So in my own work about poverty, of course, you can't do much work in the poverty realm without seeing what an incredibly important issue affordable housing is. And in many parts of the country, what a crisis point we're at in terms of addressing the issue. Many millions of Americans who are cost burdened in their rent, paying more than 30%, paying more than 50%, sometimes 75% of their annual incomes being put towards housing. We have challenges with creating enough housing on the supply side, and of course the recent foreclosure crisis, moving a lot of people who might have otherwise have been homeowners into the rental market has put a lot of pressure on the demand side as well. So I think it was clear to us that this is one of the sort of primary issues in tackling poverty that we wanted to talk about. So today we're going to start out with a keynote address, and then wanted to have a set of breakout sessions that are very interactive and really trying to be problem solving in our approach to this, looking at concrete things that we can tackle as a part of this bigger system of challenges. So my job is to introduce the event and introduce our keynote speaker, and then the Assistant Director of Poverty Solutions, Julia Weinert, is going to give you more directions on where to go from there. So I really want to thank my staff, Julia and Kristen, and our incredible team of students, who many of them are sort of at the bank back there, and will be taking notes so that we can follow up with all of you about next steps and what came out as we go on. So Arthur Jemison is the Director of Housing and Revitalization for the City of Detroit. In this role, he's responsible for investing the city's U.S. HUD entitlement resources and directing the city's multifamily housing agenda. Prior to joining city government, he spent 20 years in the development field, split evenly between the private and public sector in Boston and Washington, D.C. Most recently, he was Deputy Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts under the Patrick administration. Mr. Jemison is a graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst and has a Master's of City Planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Please join me in welcoming Director Jemison.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to use this microphone and this at the same time. So thank you for coming out on what's turning into a beautiful day in Ann Arbor. Thank you for coming to listen and talk about poverty solutions with me. And also, thank you for coming to listen to some of one of my team members, Julie Schneider, is going to be part of a panel with Sarita Scott also from Community Development Advocates of Detroit, a group we work with often. So I think you're going to get you have a great day of panels and discussions, hopefully starting with this presentation. So what I want to talk a little bit about today is affordable housing, which I talk about all day, every day. But particularly I want to try to put it in the context of I've got canned speeches I get to do, all kinds. I got a wrap down, so to speak. But just the name Poverty Solutions provoked me to take a different approach to the conversation, because I think housing's probably housing doesn't get the billing that it needs, and in solving poverty, I'm going to try to cure a little bit of that today. Maybe get some of you guys excited about being in the business. So look, I think one of my first experiences in affordable housing was working at the Cambridge Housing Authority and working with people from the Cambridge Housing Authority in Cambridge, Massachusetts, one of the leading housing authorities in America. Their executive director at the time, Dan Wenschel, also in charge of CLAFA and the founder of CLAFA, talked a lot about how his first job is why he's doing housing. And I said, what's your first job? Was it in housing? No, I was a teacher, and my worst students couldn't stay in school because they kept having to move. So that's why we got this equation. Stable housing plus quality education is the way we get positive social mobility, which is what I and our department is all about. So we're in the stable housing part of that, and we're the first part of that equation. So I always use a hypothesis to test what I'm doing against what I could be doing. What is the fastest way to get people out of poverty? I think that some of the data, unfortunately, from the Kirwan Institute and at your arch enemy school, talks about opportunity areas. It's opportunity areas. Can we get more poor people into opportunity areas, places with stable housing and high quality education? That's always that would be the fastest thing to do, right? So why can't we do that? We can't do that because we're urbanists. That's why I work in the city of Detroit. And I can't do that because there are barriers to living in those places, some of which are societal and hard to deconstruct, some of which are pretty simple, like not having any of those areas zoned for multifamily housing, for one thing. But I always try to test the next set of strategies against the easiest one, and so I just wanted to talk about this a little bit. So let's just start with a problem statement. What is the problem? And I think the problem is that Detroit is not an opportunity area right now, right? There's a lot of reasons why it's not an opportunity area, but an area that I've got control of with my partners and teammates, it's not an opportunity area because the institutions of affordable housing are not strong enough yet to provide that stable housing in the way that we need to. So how do we solve that? My theory of change, we got to turn it into an opportunity area. We have to do that by strengthening those institutions. My organization is one of those institutions, hopefully. The development community, the lenders who are involved in our work, our intermediaries, they need to be strong, and we need to be strong with them in order to provide that first part of that equation, stable, affordable housing. So how do we implement this theory of change, right? We are talking a lot about this. As many of you know, we've been bankrupt recently as a city, and getting the organization of government to reflect our goals and our metrics has been really the challenge of the last couple of years. But as we engage in what I think is an unprecedented level of planning and engaging with our community members, at least one led by the city, CDAD and DFC, a number of other people have made an effort to do it. I think this is the first time in recent memory that the city has. On April 17th, we'll have 7 neighborhood plans underway in the city of Detroit, almost all of them funded by using entitlement funds, CDBG funds. And with my partner, Maurice Cox, we're planning for many neighborhoods. We have many more to do, but we're planning, and I think the message we're trying to send to the community at large about the efforts at planning that we're doing are according to this equation, retain plus attract equals grow, right? So the battle in Detroit for many years has been at first it was Coleman Young's battle. Can we demonstrate that the census is lying and undercounting African Americans in Detroit. I think today we're trying to demonstrate population growth, and we're trying to demonstrate real, meaningful population growth. That's the metric the mayor's given me and all the other cabinet members. And this is the formula, and it doesn't really share the love that we have for the work we do and for Detroiters, but listen, if we're gonna grow, we have to keep the people we have. People make a decision every day about where they can live. And frankly, this has changed a little over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, living in an inner ring suburb for a legacy Detroiter may not have been an available opportunity. The prices were too high, and they couldn't get into other marketplaces. Today, many more people have choices. There's been white flight, there's been black flight from Detroit. People who make a decision to stay in Detroit, we have to make that an easy decision because we're creating public goods that benefit their lives day to day. If we do a good job at that, then we're going to attract new people. Other people want to be part of this driver city that we are. So how do we create great public goods for people who've been staying that attract new people and create the relationship of neighbors that we need? That's the only way we're going to grow, right? So retaining legacy Detroiters, attracting new energy, that's how our city's going to grow. So let's talk about what's in the retention formula, right? It's about getting the Detroiters access to capital. Detroiters have not had access to capital in the way that other people have been grown to expect. They can't go get home equity loans. They can't go get loans. So the first thing that the mayor asked me to do was to establish a 0% home repair loan program where people who had credit scores over 550 could get access to capital like everybody else. And so we've got over 300 of those projects completed, 400 closings have taken place. Many millions of dollars of loan capital have been invested in those into Detroit houses in this means. It's an example of the kind of work we do. Again, without the lights being on and the police working with the kind of response times they have, nobody would want to make that investment in the first place. So we're part of a network of things that are happening for legacy Detroiters. Further, we're trying to create mixed income housing that's going to attract and retain them and give them a sense of where they fit into the new Detroit. And we've got commercial improvements and mobility improvements as well. So what about the attract Detroiters, right? So many more people than have before are making the choice to move to Detroit to take advantage of the things and opportunities that we've got in our city. They're doing that for the same reason that people are moving to Boston or Atlanta or any other place that people move to, because there's an opportunity there, and it's priced right, and it's of interest to them, and it's exciting living in a different community with new people. It's the same case that's making people come to Detroit. I'm hoping every one of you will make the same decision, but these are the things that we're doing to attract them. Principally, it's critically important to say this: the things that attract people to make a decision to stay and the public goods that attract new people are largely the same, not exactly the same, but largely the same. We do a great job retaining Detroiters. All kinds of new people are going to want to become Detroiters. So how this is accomplished, in my day-to-day business, it's about producing transformational projects in neighborhoods, working with planning to identify what those projects look like and who they serve. So I'm going to tell you a little about some of the things we're doing. All right, so my team member Julie Schneider and I work every day on housing policy matters, and it's really the best way to get a look at the work that we're doing. A lot of the work I do is sort of classic real estate development work, but it's been my view that if we're going to actually generate the 10,000 units of new and preserved housing that our city needs over the next 5 years, not only do I have to have a win in every major neighborhood of strength in our city, what a win means is a 100 unit plus housing production process, whether that's preserved, rehabilitated, or new construction. I've also got to have some big policy moves that save large number of units or create a significant number of housing opportunities. So I'm going to go through these items quickly. The first thing is about resources, as you would imagine. The second is about tax policy. Third is about preservation. This is not historic preservation. This is affordable housing unit preservation, inclusionary housing, public land, and supportive housing. So let's talk about our housing strategy. I've got to produce 10,000 units. We have to make infrastructure improvements out of the vacant land that we have that make neighborhoods attractive. I've got to align all of our public service activity. We spend about $4.5 million investing in neighborhood organizations that provide services in neighborhoods. That needs to be better aligned with the housing production work that we're doing. And then finally, we have historically not been a reform-oriented department. It increases efficiency with systems. We haven't done that. So that's another major goal of ours in order to produce these units. This is a chart that Julie is responsible for personally, which identifies all the housing in the pipeline. We use this to monitor and change the work we're doing. It focuses on this sort of thing here in the center, 20% affordable housing. It's not just what we put in every RFP, it's what we strive to produce in our housing portfolio. It just happened to be this month that we had 20% affordable housing. All right, I'll talk more about these. So here's a map. We love maps. What's this a map of? This is a map of the priority areas for housing development in the city. This map isn't without controversy, but everyone has a map. This is the map that says where I can invest city entitlement funds in housing development. One of the reasons this map is controversial is because it is the places in the city with highest population density. These are the places that have already had significant demolition activity. These are the places that have the strongest commercial corridors. And so one of the questions that actually one of the professor from Michigan asked, which I'm happy to answer more fully, because it was a good and thoughtful, provocative question about why are we investing in these places? One of which, I should say, Professor DeWicki lives in here in East English Village. Why are we investing in these places first? And I'll leave you in suspense and I'll answer that question later. So listen, let's talk about resources briefly. This is a little example of what the housing resource profile looks like. The primary source of capital for affordable housing in the city is home partnership funds. We had $9 million a year, I think, in 2010. Last year, we had $5 million. So the proposed budget for next year is $0 million. So this is a major concern of ours that home money doesn't go away. Now, even if we had Congress doesn't love home as a program, but even if we didn't have the new president, home was still potentially on the chopping block. Without that money, I've got zero cash to invest in affordable housing capital. So one of the things the city's doing, working with the council, is plan to create an affordable housing development and preservation fund, which is going to get us, we think, approximately $2 million a year to invest in affordable housing, locally generated resources. By way of example, in Boston and in Washington, D.C., they have pools of resources that exceed $1 million per city, in additional locally generated affordable housing capital. So we need more resources in order to be successful. A second area where we're generating resources is the Housing Commission. Until 2015, the Housing Commission was under receivership with HUD. So HUD had an operator operating our housing authority. In 2015, we met the criteria that HUD laid out to have the housing authority return to local control. We appointed 5 board members. It's led by Richard Hosey, and we're making great strides. This year, assuming we do the work that we have planned to do this year, we will be a high performer at the Housing Commission. As a high performer, we will have access to a program called Moving to Work, which gives the city and the Housing Commission flexibility. And we think if we're competitive and are able to win a position in the Moving to Work competition, which the person who I started the story about, Cambridge Housing Authority, was the first winner of that, we'd be able to do a couple of procedures, one of which we believe is going to help us create up to $11 million of new annual rental assistance in the city, maybe 1,000, 1,500 vouchers. This is very important because as we talk later, one of the issues with affordability in the city is that 80% area median income, which is the metric by which affordable housing is measured. You know, Detroit's in a metro area that includes Warren and it includes Livonia. So even though Detroiters average income is much lower than the MSA, resources required to really serve those households are much harder to come by. So in creating Section 8 vouchers that are project-based, we would actually be able to create units that really serve the median Detroiter in addition to serving the median income. All right, so I think I just mentioned all these things. All right, so we have a tax policy problem in Detroit. If you live in certain residential neighborhoods and have an NEZ, you don't pay a lot in taxes. If you get a development incentive to develop affordable or mixed income housing, you have a low tax rate. But if you don't have one of those things, you pay a very high tax rate. Now, after working in places like Holyoke and Springfield and places where there's very low tax base, big taxes hitting day-to-day people and incentives going to people who are developing new product. We have to get this straight so that we can use the tax code to help us encourage people to develop, and in particular, to encourage affordable housing development. So let's talk about preservation. So just to give an example, there's sort of three flavors of preservation in our city. The first one has to do with just classic big city preservation. Those are units which who have housing assistance payment contracts that are expiring, and we currently estimate that there are approximately 5,000 units in the city that have expiring housing assistance payment contracts, and about half of them are in the Midtown downtown area. So it's tough enough to think about needing to house many rent-burdened households in the city. But there's a big threat to people who actually live in those units today. And in particular in our city, where these geographies really have a lot to do with what happens in the city, the idea that we could lose people's housing that they're currently occupying in Midtown downtown is particularly horrifying. So we've been working to create a preservation strategy. We have a report online on our website that talks about how dire and important this issue is. We're going to be convening advocates, owners, property managers, banks about ways that we can invest further in preservation. The mayor in the State of the City speech talked about one of the a particular example of this that was, I thought, quite effective, which I can again answer more questions about. So also, we're working with the Council on an Inclusionary Housing Ordinance. Councilwoman Sheffield and our department have been working closely on a ordinance which would require that any discounted land sales or investments of city-controlled resources have to be associated with a project that's got 20% affordable housing. And that's 20% affordable housing at 80 or below. The other thing that it does is it calls for the creation of the Affordable Housing Development and Preservation Fund that I described a minute ago. And that's something that we've been working on. We expect to be submitted later this month. So let's talk about public land. Public land is one of the things that the city has that's extremely valuable to its future. And I think we perceive it as a real opportunity to plan ahead, create amenities, and create affordable housing resources for the city. So by way of example, the city's been following a policy of issuing requests for proposals for city-owned sites, so that, and in those sites, requiring that 20% of those, the 20% of the units that are produced in those sites are affordable. And that's one of the ways we've used our public land to help us. We've got some other creative space age ways to do it too. We've been talking about using public land in greenways and bicycle paths. A sort of lesser known fact that I hope I'm stating correctly is approximately 40% of Detroiters don't have access to a car. So bikeways, they seem like the thing to do if you're a hip young man or woman, but they're also an inexpensive way to get around if you're able-bodied. So not only are bikeways hip and cool, but they also, for many Detroiters who don't have access to a car, they could be a very important connection mobility-wise. Now, day-to-day Detroiter probably say, I'm thinking more about using the bus today than I am a bike, but it is an important mode of transportation for people. So another thing that I'm very excited about is work we've been doing with the concept of public land trusts and using land trust and drainage credits and things of that nature to create real value with vacant land. Also to use green stormwater infrastructure as a way to create amenities in neighborhoods that may not have them. So public land's a part not only of delivering immediate affordable housing, but also a way of creating amenities and making neighborhoods easier and safer to travel through and around, and more beautiful. Okay, so supportive housing. I'm completely bananas about supportive housing and homelessness. This is an issue that I know I'm speaking to social workers, so I know you guys are thoughtful about it as well. This is an area where, housing, it's funny, housing is one of those things where you're having an impact, but unless you're watching them move in, you don't feel it all the time. Homelessness is like that though, because you get people right into a unit, and not only is it the scene for all of the work that social workers and doctors and others want to do, but it's very likely to extend that person's life by a metric that can be measured. It's very likely to increase their health in a way that can be measured. It's very likely to avoid public cost that can be measured. So we're very focused on this. Our mayor is a former medical hospital executive. He's particularly dialed in on this. We've accepted the challenge of housing every veteran. We have a named list today of all 300 homeless vets in our city, and that number has been going down because we've been working with our GPD facilities and our VA to reduce it. Last year, the mayor convened all homelessness providers and said, how would you like us to focus on reducing the PIT count? And the leaders in the homelessness organizations gave him a list, and that some of it was our hard work, some of it was just the landscape of the year, but the number we tried to hit, reducing the PIT count by 400, was achieved. We had some setbacks. There were more unsheltered last year than the year before, but we're focused on this issue and focused on making progress. And then finally, I think there's a particular Detroit issue, which I'm going to show a couple of precariously housed people. So Detroit has a large number of people who are living in housing in which they have no tenure. They don't rent the house from a landlord because the landlord's rights have been taken away through their failure to pay taxes, and they don't own the property because they may have owned it, but they didn't pay taxes on time, and so their ownership's been ended. So we've got many, many households in the city in these circumstances. Now, that sounds like a kind of a clinical description. What it is really, it's easier to understand as a series of newspaper articles. And so one of them, this woman appeared in the Detroit News last year because she was living in a house that had no water service. So when we got into the issue with Southwest Solutions and tried to find this woman a home, which we did, found her an affordable housing unit in the city. The issue is she was living in a house that was one of these occupied foreclosed homes that belonged to the land bank in which she had no tenure, and had been sort of eking it out in the way. There are many thousands of households in our city living under these conditions. So these are not technically, they don't meet the McKinney definition of homeless men and women and families, but they are. And this is an issue that we have big city style homelessness, so to speak. We also have the challenge of people living in precarious housing circumstances. Ted Phillips, one of your panelists who came in just a minute ago, has worked on this issue for really a generation, knows it well and how it's changed. And he's one of our partners in the NOF program and who's helped us with households and families like this one. So another example is what has happened, there's a DLBA house that caught fire and burned. And next door to it is a house that was damaged by the house that burned. So we've got one of these people in one of these houses was one of the people in the precariously housed circumstances I talked about a minute ago. So they got a hole in their roof today. They don't have tenure. They don't have a landlord. This is a very significant problem that we're studying and moving to fix. And one of the examples I'll show in a second, this is a map showing where those houses are suspected to be and we know them to be. This is an important map. So I'm going to run you through a couple projects, talk to you about what we do all day, and give you a sense of deals. So Strathmore, this is a 40% affordable housing development right at the Great Lakes Coffee corner on Woodward. This is a development that we worked on with McCormick Barron and Midtown Inc. We're proud of this one. It's got 40% affordable housing in it. It's right where you'd want housing to be. It's close to amenities, it's close to the train, It's close to job centers. So this is the type of stuff we try to do every day. This is our effort to go after the Choice Neighborhoods Program grant using the former Douglas Brewster development site. This is a kind of a bird's eye view of what it would look like. It was a 1,000-unit development with 30% affordable housing in it, all replacement units provided for. It was done in a joint venture with Bedrock and the people from Enterprise Foundation. This one did not win. We're figuring out how to come back in for the next round, assuming there is a HUD budget, and I think we've got a strategy to win. Just to give you a couple of vignettes, this is, I think, something that's important to me about our city at this time is that our city hasn't had that experience that some other cities have had of actually developing, occupying, and having people call home mixed income housing on a large scale. Detroiters, I think, are frankly used to something quite different. They're used to not mixed income housing. They've seen a lot of housing that was, except frankly, in African American neighborhoods where for many generations, everyone, all of us had to live together at whatever income we were in because we didn't have choices about where we could live. So now, many parts of America, East and West Coast cities, and sometimes even in Chicago, we have cities where there's a mix of people and a mix of incomes all living in the same neighborhood. So to me, this is not just a deal, but it is meant to be representative of where and what our city is trying to achieve, which is mixed income housing and mixed income neighborhoods where we're all living together in the way that people do, which is every day. So another vignette, more of the same. More on the other side, Eastern Market, like many people, like I'm sure you have studied, highways were designed to cut through neighborhoods and change them. The Eastern Market was walkable to Brewster Wheeler before it was demolished. And now highways separated. The plan's other big picture intent was to reconnect that neighborhood. So let's talk about a project that you can even read a newspaper article about. Earlier this week, we rolled out a plan with a developer to redevelop a quarter square mile in between University of Detroit Mercy and Mary Grove College. And it was the first opportunity site, the first plan, part of a larger plan that's happening in Livernois McNichols neighborhood of the city. So in every planning effort that we've been doing, at least the way we started, we're trying to hit these themes. I've got a couple jobs in here. I've got to do the multifamily and mixed use development and the single family residential stabilization. Maurice has to do the planning, and the police and DDOT do the other things, but I'm going to talk about the stuff I do. So Mary Grove College, University of Detroit Mercy. In this neighborhood, the broader neighborhood is one of our strongest. Mortgages are being written, real mortgages, not subprime mortgages. It's a great neighborhood. This is sort of the most frayed part of the fabric. It's a neighborhood of 600 households approximately. In amidst this neighborhood, there are over 375 vacant structures or lots. It makes the neighborhood a tougher place to live than it should be. But the mayor said, listen, I need a roadmap to figuring out how to do redevelopment. It keeps everybody that's there, that rebuilds the fabric and does something about vacant lots and vacancy, about it being maintained in a way that makes people feel good about their neighborhood. So we had a planner come into town from New Orleans who helped us. It's not Maurice, it's a vendor Maurice recommended who talked about, listen, we can take these 375 lots, we can create a park, and we can reoccupy those lots with landscape. And then I said, well, listen, why don't we take some of our multifamily approaches and use them on single family and do a single family rehab project. So from that was conceived a plan, and the plan's starting to be shown here. What the plan basically does is it kind of reconnects, creates a big central park, and then reconnects between Mary Grove and University of Detroit through a bikeway. I know bikeways, I know, it's a theme. So that's what's proposed in this plan. There's an example of what the bikeway could look like. and it's a house it's going to be demolished. That's in the area where the park's located. So we decided to do was issue 2 RFPs. First one was for the houses, 130 houses approximately, and the second one was for the landscape improvements. So people who might want to run a landscape business could build hoop houses, build other facilities that help them create a landscape and actually create an intentional managed landscape as part of the plan. So we got RFP responses back, and RFP responses back, and we announced the deal that we negotiated with the developer on Wednesday. That deal calls for the redevelopment of 115 houses over a 2-year period. It calls for the investment in a landscape that's going to include lots of great stuff, a park. The park's partly funded by the city. It's going to be run by the city, and a foundation grant from the Knight Foundation. The Civic Commons grant, it includes Kresge and Knight and other foundations as well. So we're excited about it. This PowerPoint was not prepared in time for me to include all the details, but 2 local development firms, Century Partners, who've done a similar approach with single-family housing in the just right near the Herman Kiefer neighborhood, is the lead developer, and they have some of their financing coming from the platform, Peter Cummings and Dietrich Kohner. So one other thing we're doing, I want to talk about the Beltline Greenway, is the Beltline Greenway is a project, a 2-mile bike trail between, it's going to go all the way from the waterfront up to Kercheval. So MDNR is building the Iron Bell Trail all the way from the waterfront all the way up to the Upper Peninsula. They had gotten money together to buy the Rails to Trail site, but they didn't have the money to build a park. So we recently were given an allocation of money as what's basically part of the National Disaster Resilience Competition, $8 million to invest in projects that are going to create the kind of amenities with landscape that I described earlier. And what we decided to do was we already have some leverage. There's already investment in this. Let's see if we can execute it in a way that connects the waterfront to the neighborhood. Those who are following planning news will know that we recently released a riverfront plan that, instead of focusing on big condo developments, was focused on paths between neighborhoods and the riverfront. So this is the first connection of that kind. As you can see, it's going to go past some residential onto the Uniworld site and over to the riverfront. Another example I wanted to point out was some permanent supportive housing for veterans that we invested in the Charlotte, again, not far from the new arena. These veterans units are going to be great for homeless vets. So I'm happy to answer questions. I wanted to make sure there was time for that. I hope that I have maintained that time. I think that's my last slide. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about deals or any of the other things that we're doing. So as future social workers, I'd hope that you guys would, I find that my team members who have been in that bracket have always got the best questions for me. So I'm hoping that since Megan's not here, you guys can ask some of those controversial ones.
I was just wondering, is your organization doing any work to create a city inclusive to people with disabilities, whether that's intellectual development and or physical?
So I will say that I am actually not as up on that as I should be. I will say that in the legislation that we're negotiating with the council member, she's asked, and the advocates that she works with have asked, to make sure that the ordinance includes the requirements that there be visitability and other things that are associated with not just meeting ADA, or having the accessible units, but also making sure that people are able to visit, that if we develop affordable housing units using the ordinance, that there's also the ability for people who may be in a wheelchair, by way of example, to visit other people's, other units which is visitability is sort of the next frontier, as I understand, in housing, in making sure housing meets the needs of the people you've mentioned. So I'm not, frankly, as up to date as I should be about that, but that is something she's advocated for and something we've said will go beyond code to satisfy. sorry, I wish I had a better answer, but I don't know. But I do know that in the housing production world, the code requires ADA units, and all the work we've done has met that code. But we're willing to push that further in the manner that I think you're suggesting. But that's a great first question from social workers.
What sort of efforts do you lead with other departments within the city of Detroit, like mobility or economic growth, to make sure that housing is coming in tandem with like grocery stores and food systems and bus lines, and making sure that everything is being looked at together?
So I would say that Maurice, our planning director, he's sure. The question was, do we have teams that meet to talk about things like mobility, or things like grocery store development, things that are attending the needs of low-income people in the city? I think that's the intent. So I would say that we are pretty close with DDOT. They recently announced brand new routes that were designed to do some of those things. I would mention my dad's bus route wasn't changed, which I'm sure he was involved somehow in not changing his bus route. I don't know if maybe you wanted it to be changed. So that's one part. The other part is, so on grocery stores, we have an affiliate, the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, that has a green grocer program. We are, and have been for a generation, underserved by grocery stores. And the grocery store sort of solution is complicated because, it's got to be rooftops. And, we've lost hundreds of thousands of occupied rooftops. And frankly, we've lost, actual physical rooftops too, with the demolition program. So it's hard to make the case. That said, we've had 2 Myers move into the city, one on 8 Mile, the other on Grand River, and we're hoping to get more. I know that there's plans to do something on Jefferson. We've had more and more people talking about doing some of the urban format supermarkets. So we're excited about that, but it can't come fast enough. We're also trying to invest in some of our local stores, but DGC's been the coordinator of that, and we fund their activities annually with money that comes through our department, and they've been a great partner to us, and we're hoping to do more of that. But DGC, Marty Teray and his team are the people to probably ask about that.
I was very pleased when Mayor Duggan in his inaugural address talked about retaining the population of Detroit and increasing the population of Detroit. We have seen, and continues to this day, a substantial outmigration of the middle class population from the city of Detroit. Now, Mayor Duggan spoke early in his term that he was going to reassess properties because property tax rates are very high in Detroit, and assessments were sometimes unrealistically high. I think there was an expectation that assessments would go down about 15%. I'm wondering if you can talk about how that is going on, since it does speak to retaining the middle class population, as well as Mayor Duggan was going to work on reducing the insurance rates for automobiles, and I think only a little progress has been made on that. And there's also the fire insurance rates, which are very high.
Absolutely.
So can you, repeat the question and then try to break the question down?
Sure, those are 3 good questions. So first one for everybody was about reassessments. The second one was about car insurance. The third one was about fire insurance. So on assessments, earlier this year he announced a reassessment, which I think reduced some property taxes, not to the degree that I think even he wanted, but it was a significant reduction. As I mentioned, the city has a very high tax rate when compared to peer cities, and bringing it down. And the other problem is a lot of it goes to pay for stuff that other people were managing. That there's a lot of opinions about school improvements, a whole range of different things, some of which we didn't have any control over. So the stuff that's in that tax rate, I can remember conversations on the 11th floor where we kind of go from one end of the spectrum, like we've got to do something about changing the way that the tax incentive system, what it incentivizes, what it doesn't, to, it doesn't matter, half that money leaves the city anyway, let's abate it and use the tax abatements to get development. So I would say that one of our goals, I've got some tenacious team members who push this every day about needing to get the tax reform with our code to encourage affordable housing and to use it to encourage affordable. There's only a few ways today that it does that. So on the tax thing, if we Google some articles together, you'll see the update on what he's doing. Two, on car insurance, frankly, he's been thwarted in his efforts. I have had a chance to listen to the mayor speak a lot in my job, and I've almost never seen him just turn into a red hot, instrument of the peace in the way that he does when he talks about insurance and the way that it works. And unfortunately, even the Detroit delegation didn't agree with the approach he took to de-insurance. So, and again, that's spoken like a guy who ran a hospital that was the primary beneficiary of those rules, converted like, making the case like a converted person. Only a converted person can. So he's fired up about it. He's going to go back and try it again. On the fire issue, he's actually taking a different approach. So we had a presentation by the fire chief who talked about the fact that a lot of it had to do with the rating of fire and water equipment in the city and its condition. So things like storm drains and fire hydrants and things that I don't think about very often. We were getting graded very poorly on the condition of those things, and that's why the fire insurance rates were so high. He believes that this year our score is going to increase to a B. We'll be able to go back to having only kind of high fire insurance as opposed to completely outrageously high insurance. So those are three topics I don't deal with all the time, but hopefully I've given you a flavor for what I think's going on. So I got two hands in the back, and then we'll come over here. Ted, I'm not calling on you, man. You know too much. So.
Can you elaborate a little bit about the impact of the NEZ with the economic zones?
Yes.
That's for those in the area. Are they stripping some of the real estate invested in the city, and are they set to expire anytime to provide more future tax revenue?
I'm afraid you probably should answer. It sounds like you know a little bit about it. So yes, in prior administrations, the question was about NEZs, neighborhood enterprise zones, or empowerment zones, I think is the accurate word. Enterprise zones. So in neighborhood enterprise zones, basically it's a time limited reduction in taxes, and some residential neighborhoods have it, others don't. So in those neighborhoods, taxes are kind of artificially low. And frankly, and just sort of received wisdom for me was that it was used as an instrument to kind of, frankly, a benefit that you try to give in areas that are strong to keep them strong and keep people from leaving. And again, some of them are expiring, which creates more authority to reallocate them. But I think what we're thinking is that we need to step back and say, is that the right way to do it? And creating a kind of a class of people who just live in normally taxed areas that are really taxed to a painful degree. Whereas new development doesn't get taxed very hard, and people living in these neighborhoods don't get taxed very hard. How do we create a situation that's a little more equitable and reduces the overall tax burden on the city? So I think that's what we're hoping to do with the tax portion of the Detroit Affordable Housing Strategy that we are working on in the policy section of our department. There's a woman back there, and then we'll come over here.
So my question is related to accessibility and mobility and affordable accessible housing. We know that in Detroit, DDAC has had repetitive issues with accessible transportation. And I'm just wondering if we know what percentage of increase related to this affordable housing effort has also been focused on creating access for people with disabilities to also be able to have affordable housing.
So this is a great question. I don't have any more information than I had before about it. I'll just say that you're raising it my attention level. I unfortunately can't tell you that I know about Dan Dirk's efforts to do that. I am certainly going to learn more after today's conversation. I mean, I think, as you've said, it's critical that new units include not just code, and not just sort of visitability, but people are able to use them. I know that there's very few of these units, and frankly, housing authorities are typically a place where you have the most reliable ones.
Housing urban development the population.
I completely concur. I appreciate you bringing you and the person who brought that up, bringing it up today. So there are questions over here. Ma'am?
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my question. I'm very happy to hear that the mayor had made it possible for all the veterans to be housed in Detroit, and I appreciate all the information you included for the homeless veterans. I was wondering if you could, if you know, what were some of the steps they took to identify the homeless veterans
vets?
so that it could be implemented in Washington County?
Sure. So we have a problem where we have an HMIS system. There's a question about how we got data related to homeless veterans. So this is a chronic problem. So we have a database, HMIS system that helps us monitor and keep track of people who are being admitted to homeless shelters and facilities. But for many years, that data was not able to be kind of confirmed because we didn't have a data relationship with the Veterans Administration, who has a different database, which often doesn't include the same set of vets. So my supportive housing team leader wrote a pretty nasty letter to the VA, and then the mayor had a couple of conversations with the vets. And again, when you finally get the attention of the right people, there's no interest in withholding, but it's just there's HIPAA and other requirements that have to be observed. So we managed to break through that, and now we've got what we call a named list of vets that is same and is checked every week to make sure that it's the same as the one that we have. So now we have one list, and we're able to try to get veterans housed using that one list. So it took a kind of active engagement with the VA to do it. I should also mention that there's been a RFP for what they call grant per diem beds, which changes the incentive system for grant per diem facilities. Grant per diem facilities are facilities that veterans can stay in for a period of days. And frankly, the operators of those facilities are incentivized for having occupancy. And so even when you could go into one of those facilities with a bunch of live Section 8 vouchers, and people are going to say, well, I mean, I need these guys to be here. And again, it's like a kind of perverse incentive. So we working on that issue with the Veterans Administration. Michelle Obama and her initiative to house homeless vets has really had a huge impact. So I'm gathering I can only take 2 more questions. One more question. It's tough between you and Ted. Okay. You go for it. Ted's going to have a whole other session. Well, how do you know? I might drop in. I want public comment.
Thanks. My question is the city doing anything with deed restrictions or covenants or any other sort of agreements to maintain these units as affordable units perpetually or for any affordability period or anything like that?
Sure. So in every development that we put federal resources in, the home requirements, yes, have a deed restriction and have a covenant on the land for those 30 years, and that gives us leverage to renew and extend the life of those projects. So yes, in any investment that we're in, we've got that happening. It's a short answer. So since that was short, does Ted get a shot now? Okay. All right. So come on.
Thank you, Mr. Jemison.
Thank you.
It's such a pleasure to have you. This was an honor. We're